Okay, and now I have the privilege of introducing Erica Orange. And let me tell you about Erica Orange. Let me see if I can move this. This is Michelle. Let me go back. When we decided that the topic was gonna be onward, I remember telling Laura, vamos a ver si aquí está. Yo creo que sí. Vamos a ver. I remember telling Laura, we need a futurist. We need a futurist. That's a must. I spent weeks and weeks looking for futurists. And Erica, she is the EVP of the Future Hunters. She's one of the world's, listen to this, one of the world's leading futurist firms. Erica, look at what she does. Erica analyzes emerging technological, economic, geopolitical trends, and the so what. And she does that for Fortune 500 companies in the United States of America and around the world. They are so fascinating that they have been featured in magazines and publications like Forbes, Time, Inc., and Bloomberg. Imagine that with us, Erica Orange.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me. I am so thrilled to be here. I wish I could be there in person, but I am here live from my hotel room in Dallas, and so happy to be seeing all of you. Now, Francis, thank you so much for that warm welcome. And it is all such a journey to study the future. And so one of the things, just a little bit about me, before I start off, one of the things that I did pre-COVID and even really before I even had my son, who is now 4, is I went skydiving. And it was such a thrilling experience for me. But at the same time, I was absolutely terrified. And I was terrified, one, because I knew that, my arms were spread like this. I looked like a tiny little baby pterodactyl falling from the sky. And I was so afraid because I knew on one hand, it was very risky. But on the other hand, I knew that I was still secure. I knew that even though I was free falling, I still had the safety net of a parachute, and that ultimately nothing was going to happen to me. And it gave me a sense of security and calm. And even though my feet weren't on the ground, I knew eventually they would be. And that very much is how we are experiencing the future. It feels in many ways like we are catapulting into it, free falling into it. There is so much fear and trepidation and anxiety. And then you throw a global pandemic into the mix, and it feels as if we have no way, shape, or form around this future. But one of the overriding messages, and one of the things that I'm going to talk to you all about today, is the fact that the future is ripe with opportunities, and we will always have the safety net of that parachute on our back. We just have to learn new ways to leverage and harness it. We're always going to be okay as long as we understand where we're going and how we get there. So one of the things that we know is that we are in this period of just unbelievable change. And we're seeing the acceleration of change, particularly because one of the things that COVID has done is it has shot us through what I would call the COVID accelerator. All of these things and all of these trends that I have been tracking for the better part of 15 years have now been shot through this accelerator effect, such that things are happening at an exponential rate. And when you really think about it, change in and of itself is not the news story today. Change has been with us since the very beginning of human history. But what truly is that news story is that pace of change. And that is what all of us are feeling, and all of us are grappling with navigating this pace of change. And whether it comes to the expectations, the risks, the realities, all of these things are multiplying. But one of the things that becomes so critical in this environment is that we can no longer, and we no longer have the luxury of doing this, we can no longer preserve our tried and true way of doing things. We have to move on to the next value proposition. We need to move on to the next and the new. And it's with the theme of this conference, we need to move onward. So when we really think about change and how this is starting to really manifest today, it comes down to one thing. Now, economists basically define a luxury as something that is in high demand and short supply. Now, if I were to ask all of you what in your lives is in the highest of demand and shortest of supply, what would you say? I can't see you guys or hear you guys, but I am sure that so many of you would say time. Time today is something that is in the highest of demand and shortest of supply. And time is something that is becoming rapidly truncated. And time in many ways is becoming the new currencies. And one of the reasons for this is because we are living at a time where things are getting so rapidly compressed that we are now being catapulted into an economy where time and space are no longer linear. Time is something that is no longer geometric. It is happening exponentially. So what do I even mean by that? Time today is making it so that I can have one life and one persona in the real world, another life and another persona in the digital world, another life and another persona in the virtual world. And I have long argued that definitions of success in the future are going to be defined by our seamless navigation of all of these very disparate realities. Because one of the things that we know is that we are entering a world marked by boundarylessness. When we started going through the transformation of our economy 15 years ago, back when we were defining it as a recession in 2008, when in fact we knew it was indicative of something far greater, which was a fundamental transformation, we saw the boundaryless nature of all that we do and how we do it. So what do I even mean by that? What I mean by that is that we are seeing the coming together of everything from the real and the virtual, the tangible and the intangible, the analog and the digital, in many cases, even that which is biological and that which is technological. And increasingly, we are now fast approaching a time when we are seeing the boundaries between that which is real and that which is fake, and that which is true and that which is false, all starting to come together. So this is the environment that we are trying to navigate. And it comes down to time and simultaneous time. And the future is going off in these multiple directions. And time in many ways is our greatest asset. So knowing that time is the currency today and how any corporate entity can compete in the future will be by leveraging truly the value proposition of time. What does all of that mean and how is that playing out? So one of the things that I like to do in my shop, because it's my understanding that in order to really get the future right, we cannot get stuck using existing vocabulary. Rather, we need to sometimes invent our own. And so much so that we have almost hundreds of different terms over the years that we have coined, but I would say probably the mother of all terms. And for our purposes today, perhaps the most important. I'm going to be throwing two out at you guys today. The first, to describe this compression of time, we call this templosion, the temporal implosion of time. And what does templosion even mean? Templosion is the fact that the biggest of things, the biggest of events are happening in shorter and shorter periods of time. So we see this applied to everything from the compression of strategic planning cycles, financial planning cycles, research and development cycles. Economists today predict that the average lifespan of a Fortune 500 company could be as little as 15 years. And one of the reasons for this is because of the rapid rise of startups. These unicorn companies, many of which have tremendous valuations in the marketplace and little to no stated monetization strategy. Many of them are also employing sophisticated technologies and employing fewer and fewer people, actual human labor in their workforces. And we also see constant cycles of iteration. This is kind of the Chinese model where it's build a product, test it on the back of consumers, and then go back to the drawing board and reiterate. It is all about speed and speed to market. But one of the biggest things, and this is what I'm going to focus on with all of you today, is one of the things that Templosion is really leading to is the compression of generational cycles. Now, one of the things that market researchers and demographers have long gotten wrong and continue to get wrong is the fact that we today still define a generation in 12 to 15 year age cohorts. And if we're lucky, maybe we will redefine them every 10 years. Now, in an age of Templosion and technological disintermediation and the increasing rise of all of these displacing technologies, what sense does this make? This is outdated thinking that we are applying to a completely new situation. So it is my view that instead of creating these big, large cohorts, we need to go back to the drawing board and we need to redefine generations, not every 12 to 15 years, but instead every 2 to 3 years. Now, we talk about a workforce that is made up largely of 5, 6 generations at once, but we're going to have to start getting comfortable operating in an environment that is employing dozens upon dozens of micro generations at once, each with completely different ways of communicating, different feedback structures, and different values and attitudes. And now one of the other things that we need to do is that we need to start being a little bit more clever when it comes to naming and understanding these generations. They're just links in an alphabetical sequence. We had Gen X, then we had Gen Y, and we called them millennials. And now we think, what comes after Y? Z. Let's call those kids born after 1996 Gen Z. But it doesn't actually tell us anything about who they are and what matters to them. So, as I said, we like to make up words. And one of the words that we have created to really get to the heart of this generation is that we call them cybrids, cyber hybrids. And it's not to evoke any sort of notion of a cyborg. That might actually be the generation coming up behind them, but cybrids, cyber hybrids. And we call them this because they are the first generation ever in human history to truly, from the time that they are born, have a symbiotic relationship with the technology that surrounds them. And one of the marked differences between this generation and preceding generations is the fact that this is the first generation ever to truly have a different brain. Now, we might kind of tongue-in-cheek say, yes, of course they have a different brain. They do all of these things in a completely different way. They have to be like an alien from another planet. But truly, we are growing different brains. Access to technology at the earliest of ages is making it so that they have different neural wiring. Now, longitudinally, we're not quite sure, obviously, how this is going to manifest. But when it comes to the fact that we are growing very different brains and neural structures, it's making us rethink a couple core things. The first thing that we need to reinvent and reimagine is our current educational system. Now, if we have new minds, why are we putting them into an educational system that was not just appropriate for my parents or my grandparents, but my great-grandparents, one that is rooted in truly industrialized era economy metrics? Why are we putting new brains into these systems? And it's no wonder that they can't pay attention. So we need to redefine our curricula. And then we wonder why, when we put them into siloed and hierarchical organizations, those in their 20s, again, after years of different neural wiring, we wonder why they can't pay attention and they have on average 7 different jobs by the time they are 25. We need to rethink our recruitment and retention policies when it comes to actually luring these young brains into our organizations, because it's like putting a square peg in a round hole. And we try to get them to pay attention versus actually thinking how we can shift and change our organizational mindsets. So let's go through some of their values and attitudes and defining characteristics so that we can really start understanding more of what matters to this generation. Gen Z, these cybrids, are a generation that is highly collaborative. They are very inclusive, and they are also very entrepreneurial. Now, people will come to me and say, oh, Erica, but weren't millennials entrepreneurial? And the flat out answer to that is no. You think of when millennials came of age, and they came of age during the economic recession, what I call the transformation. So as a generation, they largely are very risk averse. But the cybrids have learned the lessons from their predecessors, and they are much more financially savvy, and they are willing to take more calculated risks. And they don't want to be part of the traditional economy as it exists. They want to create and do their own thing. Messages of sustainability are very, very important to them. Any brand with which they purchase from, it has to not just be about doing green, but really being green. So any company has to lead with their sustainability initiatives, and cybrids will see whether it is just a nice to have or a need to have corporately, and will be able to sniff out those who aren't actually practicing what they preach. Now, one of the things, because they are so technologically savvy, they want control over their own data. So for any brand or company that they interface with, they want the fact that they are using sophisticated technology to be there. That is a must-have. But they want transparency in how that data is being used. So things such as authenticity and trust, these become very critical cornerstones. And even more so than just transparency, it has to be about honesty. How do you lead from a place of pure honesty and deliver messages that truly resonate with this generation? So it's not just about leveraging time with them in new ways, because it all is really about speed. Cybrids are going to be very impatient for long and drawn out protocols, long marketing messages, technology that doesn't work. So it has to be about time and leveraging that value proposition of time, but it also has to be about one other critical luxury that is rising up alongside of time, and that is trust. Trust and truth, and the coming together of all three of those. Time, trust, and truth are three of the luxuries and three of the currencies that you have to lead with today. Now, one of the other things, let's look at some of their financial influence. They, in many ways, are becoming their own independent economic engines. As I said before, they are circumventing in some ways the current economic system, because the under 18s, leveraging social media, leveraging all of these platforms, whether it's TikTok or YouTube or Instagram, they are the creators. They are really bolstering and buoying the rise of the creator economy. And they don't have to ask their parents for permission. They are doing, selling, monetizing their own creations and their own talent, and creating and becoming, in many ways, their own economies. They have a much more pragmatic approach to money. As I talked about before, they are much more financially savvy than their predecessors. But interestingly enough, they wield tremendous marketplace power. In the US alone, they represent over $144 billion worth of spending power. And this buying power is actually bottom up versus trickle down. So what do I mean by that? Purchasing decisions used to always come down from the grandparents to the parents to then the children. That is how buying and purchasing decisions were made. Now, again, because they are so technologically savvy, they are learning about the products that they want to purchase from. They are learning about the integrity of the company, and they are telling their parents what to buy. And then the parents are taking that message and telling their parents what to buy. An interesting statistic, 93% of US parents say that their children influence their family or household purchases. So that is tremendous. So when you think of who your consumers and your workers are, it's not just that they are those of tomorrow, they are those of today. So we have to start paying more attention to them and really what matters to them. Now, one of the other things that matters is that we tend to think of them as just being technologically savvy. That's only one piece of the puzzle. The other part is that they still crave the tactile, the sensorial, the nostalgic. They still want human-to-human interaction. So much so that 53% prefer in-person communication. So they are a completely different animal. And how we talk to them, how we tap into their thinking has to basically take advantage of completely new strategies. Now, one of the things that I want to focus on is, since we know their world is going to be about Templosion on steroids, one of the biggest things is that the business environment for them is going to shift dramatically. So let's go through a few ways in which the business environment for them is going to change. One of the things for them is that when they go into the workplace is not just going to be made up of their human counterparts. They are going to be cultivated in a world that I would call the neo-humanic workforce. They are going to be comfortable working side by side with robotic peers, what I call non-carbon life forms, and all of these AIs and electronic entities that are increasingly disintermediating parts of human labor. Granted, it is going to augment many parts of what we do and how we do it, but these cybrids are going to grow up in a world where their work is going to be about humans and machines working symbiotically and collaboratively side by side. They're also coming into a world that is less about smart. Smart doesn't matter anymore, because what ultimately is smart? Smart is based largely on rote memorization that is linearly based. So it gets us from A to B to B to C. Now, what or who can think that way? Smart systems and robots. And that is why when we educate around smart, or we put people into jobs that are for smart people, those jobs are going onto software and those jobs are being automated. Cybrids today, and generally everybody across the board, in order to really make ourselves relevant in this environment, we have to think in terms of intelligence. And intelligence, how is it different? Intelligence is based on critical thinking, analytical and critical thinking, that takes in everything from sense making to curiosity. And it is about figuring out the solution to a problem when you've never been faced with that problem before. That is what we have to train for. And that is the one area where cybrids are going to have to compete. Now, Francis, at the beginning of this, you were talking about some of the other presentations and the need for lifelong learning. And lifelong learning for everybody is so critical. But I would also say in this environment, one other thing becomes equally, if not more important, and that is lifelong forgetting. And lifelong forgetting means not only continually challenging your core bases of information, but acknowledging that which we know, which is outdated and doesn't serve us anymore. Because that which we know is great and we can constantly learn. But if we are learning something that is outmoded, then how comfortable are we leaving it like baggage on the side of the road? Because what we know is both our greatest asset and our greatest liability. And we have to begin seeing both in order to realize how we can actually future-proof ourselves now and in the years to come. The other thing is that it's all work in the future is going to be about acquiring not just physical bodies. Look at us, time and space don't matter anymore. We are all doing this from different places. It's about acquiring and harnessing minds. We are moving from what I would call mankind to mind-kind. And how do you hire and cultivate the minds that are going to be required to do the jobs in the future, and those jobs in the future that we can't even begin to imagine today? Because again, it comes down to future-proofing. And future-proofing yourself in this new economy is going to be less about picking a safe job. And it's going to be more about constantly updating your skills throughout your entire career. Now, one of the things that also becomes important to realize when viewed through the lens of Templosion is that cybrids in particular sit at a very critical juncture today. And we're at a juncture where technologies are not only leapfrogging each other at this breathtaking pace, but we are at a point where technological discovery and development in some ways is outpacing our ability to even understand it, such that Templosion is caving in on itself in some ways, it's like we are reaching an absolute 0 point where we will no longer be able to adapt and respond to these major disruptions because they will be happening too quickly. And we're living that right now as we're simultaneously trying to navigate both the global pandemic and also the rapid acceleration of something like climate change. And these two things in conjunction, it's almost frying our brains. But we have to get comfortable knowing that this is just the world that we are entering. So cybrids are going to be much more adept at navigating these realities, but it's also going to come down to one thing. And I will leave you at this point with this point, because we can talk so much about innovation and innovating and rapidly innovating in this world and catering to a new generation and capitalizing on speed. But one of the things when I ask audiences who is truly being innovative, all of these hands always go up in the air. But are we truly innovating? If we can answer that question so quickly, are we truly being innovative? Or do we need to flip our perspective and instead think in terms of something else that becomes more critical today? And that is harnessing the power of human imagination. Humans are never going to run out of imagination. When we think about climate change and we think about the degradation of our planet, human imagination is the one renewable resource today. And we do have a choice ultimately in what it is that we do imagine. We have a choice not to imagine by thinking linearly and investing in yesterday, whether it's our schools, our jobs, even our healthcare systems. But we have the ability to positively imagine. And we also have to imagine our way out of all of the doom and gloom narratives that surround us. So one of my favorite sayings, and I will leave you with this, it's an adage that says, a diamond is merely a lump of coal that does well under pressure. And I love that because all of us are shaped and molded by our realities. In the same way that pressure is needed to transform a piece of coal into a diamond, we, societally, individually, organizationally, also require pressure for our transformation. And as that transformation happens more and more quickly, how do we create our own diamonds? How do we leverage time to create a multitude of opportunities and the cultivation of future-proofed opportunities, which in my mind know absolutely no limit? And on that note, thank you all so much for your time. I don't know if we actually have time for a couple of questions, but Francis, I will kick it off to you. And please feel free to make my email available if anybody has any follow-up questions to any of the things that I talked about very quickly in the last 25 minutes.
That was incredible. I'm looking at you. I love looking at you so big behind me. I need everyone, please do me a favor. Could you please take a picture of this so that we can post it and share it with her? Can you do that? Yes? They're taking pictures right now of us. Me looking extremely tiny. Hey, well, while you were speaking, I saw everyone taking notes and notes and notes. And I know that Dave Hughes, he is the general manager for L'Oreal. He has a question. If anyone can handle the microphone so that we can hear his question, is Dave Hughes, general manager for L'Oreal Puerto Rico.
Great. Good morning to everyone, and thank you, Erica, for a great presentation. I hope she can hear us.
I can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. With the concept of Timplosion, and as you see that progressing, as well as the pace of innovation, you mentioned 2 to 3 years in the generational shifts. So where are we? Are we in the middle of a 2 to 3 year period? Is there one that you see in the next year or two that's coming up that's going to either evolve from the hybrids to something new? Thank you.
Yes, that is such a great question. And I think that we are constantly at the precipice of redefining ourselves from a values and attitudes perspective. But I think when I talk about this COVID accelerator effect, I think the experience of our young people through remote learning and the fact that they too have experienced more of a boundaryless world, whether it's happening at 6, 8, or 18. I think that we're going to see a cleaving between those that had even traditional rites of passage in a pre-COVID environment and those that then had to replicate those digitally. There were even some in Japan that recreated those through avatars. This marks a very different kind of generational cohort break that I would say that we would have those then in a post-COVID environment. And then you extrapolate this even further down. And I look at my 4-year-old son, who is, I'm doing this in a hotel room, who is being such a good boy and hiding in the other room while I do this, who's 4. And his environment is going to be so completely different. So to even compare him to an 8-year-old, and I make this point because, and I just celebrated my 40th birthday, and I say that because I am technically a millennial, but yet when I graduated college 2003, someone graduated in 2005 with social media, MySpace, Facestar, like Friendster, the first iteration of social media. We're not of the same generation, but we are marketed to and advertised to as if we are identical, and our frames of reference are so different. So this is not a new phenomenon. This goes back even 15 years, which is why I say that this was a fundamental transformation that we went through at the early part of the 2000s. We just weren't seeing it for what it truly was. So we constantly have to refresh what we know about them. And even at the other end of the spectrum, we can't just lump those 65 plus in the same category. We should be defining them in the same exact way. This is a whole, I could go on and on about this. So for instance, I don't want to eat into Michelle's time.
Thank you so much. Let me take a selfie with you. Let's see if I can do this. I'm counting on you all. Please help me with the pictures. Erica, thank you so much. You have been a dream speaker. We owe you big time. I want everyone in Puerto Rico to say "Huepa" in gratitude to her information. 1, 2, 3. Did you hear that?
Thank you all so much for your time, and here's to a fabulous event. And thanks, I will kick it back off to you. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, dear. Wow, thank you so much. That was incredible.